A lot of my audience is they're in their 20s, their 30s, and their 40s, and they're focused on living longer. They're focused on energy levels. They're focused on longevity. How can NAD help with that?
Well, a few years ago, 10 years ago, I think it would have been realistic to say that, we've gotten as far as we can get. We've made tremendous improvements. We're not where we were 50, 100 years ago. We have people living into the 80s and 90s, and it seems like the best we could do. But that's changed. In the last 10 years, 15 years, there's been a lot of research. NAD has been the focus of that. And I truly believe, based on the science I've seen and the experiences we've seen, that it's a different ballgame. We're going to have people living to 100 and 105. And I hope my grandchildren will be out there at 120. It's not just longevity. It's also about living well, living in good health. And the kind of science we're seeing, the changes we can make, the interventions that are available, it's a new world. Now, NAD is, as you say, is the focus of that. I mean, there are many molecules involved in aging, many molecules involved in health, but NAD, it's fair to say it's the centerpiece. I mean, it's really the maestro. It's the symphony conductor of all of these processes, and everything comes back to it. And unfortunately, its levels fall. So as we age and it is less and less, we're not as well. And so that's really where we should start today to talk about how this fundamental advancement in the understanding of what NAD is, what it can do, how we can intervene. This is where the excitement's going to happen.
And I definitely want to dive into NAD and the other molecules as well. I think first, like something struck me that you said, and that we have these advancements and things that people can do to increase their lifespan. Like what does longevity mean to you when you think about the term longevity? Because it's floated around a lot. Like what does that actually mean to you?
Well, longevity technically is how long you can live. And probably, I'm saying probably, that's probably preordained in our genes so that the human species is relegated to a lifespan, ultimately, of, let's say 120 years. That's the max. And it's true, there's a lot of genetics involved in how long you live. I mean, mosquitoes live a lot differently than a tortoise, or a lake shark, which goes out to 400 years. So it's wired into your genes what your ultimate longevity is, how long you can ultimately live. Maybe we can correct that, though. We can even change that if we understand the aging process. So I would no longer put 120 years as the absolute max, but we want to push through that category. We want to knock down that barrier and get people living to 115, 120 in good health. So their lives are meaningful, not just long.
What do you tell someone who is convinced that their genetics have determined the outcomes of their health?
That's probably true, but that doesn't mean that they can't do anything about it. But they're probably correct. We know families that live to 100 and 105. We also know families that live to 60s and 70s. So genes are really important in the whole story, but that doesn't mean you have to throw up your hands and give up. Now that we know more about the basics, about what's causing aging, we can look at people who are, people who pass away in their 60s and 70s and say, what happened? What can we do about that? What do we understand about it? What interventions are available? So everything's on the table now that we really are getting a handle on the basic science.
Let's dive into NAD. It's gotten a lot of press over the last few years. Like, why is it so powerful, and how does it impact the body on a cellular and physiological level, and so much so that it has these amazing benefits?
Yeah. So I've been working on NAD now for 45 years. And during that time, we've learned a tremendous amount about what it can do. It's really involved in almost every single major biological process that I could think of. I mean, it's involved in cognition, in sexual function, in the cardiovascular system, in blood pressure, in the digestive system. Everything suddenly or completely surrounds that molecule because it is at the center point of so many critical biological processes. First of all, NAD is involved with energy. Every single movement we make, every thought we have, every metabolic activity that we endure, everything requires energy. Everything. And all of that is based on ATP, which is the final common mover, if you will, or currency of energy. But what makes that ATP? What gives us that energy? It's NAD. So NAD is intrinsically involved in the cell in making ATP and making energy. If you don't have NAD available, or if it's malfunctioning, if it's not positioned correctly, if you're in short supply, you can't make ATP. You can't make enough. and you will suffer the consequences of low energy. So that's the first thing, is metabolism or energy. Second thing, NAD is absolutely crucial to a certain enzyme, a group of enzymes that repair DNA. Now, every minute we are exposed to all kinds of stresses, both internal and external, that are damaging our genes, that cause mutations that can lead to cancer, that can lead to early death. And there are mechanisms in there. There are genetic mechanisms, proteins involved that correct these breaks, these damages, these mutations. And those all use NAD. So if NAD is in good supply, you can fix your DNA. If it's in poor supply, you're looking at potential mutations in cancer. So that's the second thing. The third thing is that NAD is involved in the regulation of another group of proteins called sirtuins. And these are intimately involved in the whole aging process. They control so many different physiological events that have to do with how long we live and how well we live. And without NAD, the sirtuins are inactive, ineffective, can't do anything. So for all of those reasons, NAD is a crucial player. It sits in the middle, and it's tied into practically every biological process. So without good NAD levels, you're going to suffer a whole broad set of consequences.
Now, we know a lot about what people can do to increase their vitamin C in their diet. We know a lot about what people can do to increase vitamin D, magnesium, calcium, all these things. Is there any lifestyle habits that can increase NAD levels naturally, or things that people do in their lifestyle that decrease NAD levels that people should pay attention to?
Well, first, let's talk about diet. There are some basic foodstuffs that are required that provide the essential materials to make NAD, but these are found in almost any normal diet. So unless you're on some kind of very abnormal or restrictive diet, that's usually not an issue. A second thing is that you want to be sure, to the best of your ability, that you're not on a really high carb, high sugar type of diet, because that will cause a lot of consumption, unnecessary consumption of energy, and that will specifically reduce the amount of NAD that's produced. So if you can move towards a more balanced diet, or even better, honestly, a keto diet, something which is relying more upon fats than on carbs, that can definitely improve the efficiency of the mechanisms that make NAD. So we can boost NAD by getting on a better diet. There are other things as well, but most, like good exercise. I mean, clearly that is important in utilizing NAD well, in avoiding inappropriate or excessive consumption of NAD. So good exercise, good diet, and attention to maybe a keto diet or something in that direction, something not too overly carb driven. Those are easy things to do for most people. Beyond that, we really need to look at how we can supplement NAD, what we can do to boost up, what kind of medications or new dietary supplements are available to raise the levels. We'll talk about that today because there are several choices there. The last thing we can do is to avoid the destruction, removal of NAD. There are mechanisms in the body that are very prevalent that remove NAD. They destroy it and clear it. So when we're talking about having a good level of NAD, it's not enough just to get it or to, swallow it or take it up to make it. You also want to prevent its removal. Imagine you have a bathtub. You're putting water into the bathtub through a spigot, but you also have a drain. So if you look at the level of the water in the bathtub, it's not just about how much the spigot is turned on. It also has to do with the size of the drain. So removal of NAD is just as critical a question as providing it. And it's the balance ultimately which determines the level.
And when it comes to like a keto or lower carb diet, like, is there like a relationship between like insulin and NAD? Why is it best to follow like a lower carb diet?
Ketosis or a quasi-keto or a ketotic diet or something like that has a profound impact on how energy is made. When you're consuming a lot of sugar, you're on a high carb diet, for example. What happens is that the body recognizes that and insulin is produced, and you are essentially getting your energy from glucose and other sugars. And that's it's okay, but it's an inefficient way to produce ATP. and it uses a lot of NAD up in the process. Conversely, if you are on a keto diet or something approximating that, you make ATP much more efficiently. You don't need as much NAD to be consumed to make a good amount of ATP. So it's a much more efficient diet, requires less NAD, and therefore consumes less. We talked about the bathtub with the drain and the spigot. So here, by going on a keto diet, you're making that drain smaller. So you're not using up as much NAD to get the same bang for the buck.
And do you like, what role does exercise play in this equation? Because I mean, when it comes to longevity, aging, we know the benefits of exercise. Is there any kind of relationship between movement and NAD levels?
Well, being in good shape and maintaining good muscle mass and having good blood circulation into the muscles are all part of being in good shape and having exercise, right? So the more you exercise, the more your muscles are exposed to the heavy cardiovascular stress, the more blood vessels will come into those muscles, and the distance from the blood vessel to the cell is less. And so there's more oxygen coming in. So naturally, more NAD and ATP will be produced. So you really can beef up your production of NAD by continuous exercise. To give you an example, if you go to a professional basketball game, you will see players out there for 60 minutes running at full speed, and they're not winded. How can that be? How can they have tremendous exertion over 60 minutes when the average person wouldn't last 5? And the answer is that their blood circulation is so intense because of new blood vessel formation in their muscles that they can produce tremendous amounts of NAD and ATP in the same time period. And so exercise is absolutely critical in getting the NAD made and to your muscles where you need it for your exercise.
So one of the biggest takeaways I've heard so far is like NAD, essentially it's like energy production. Like that's like one of its main functions. And people should really be concerned with this even when they're like younger, because like there's a lot, I mean, there's so many people that are just burned out. They're working too much. They're not sleeping, they're stressed, and their energy levels just plummet. Do things like stress and lack of sleep, can they crush NAD levels as well?
I don't think stress and sleep problems affect NAD generally, but I would say that the biggest problem with NAD is that we're getting older. And as we age, every year there's a decrease in the amount of ambient NAD in our system. If you take a 20-year-old who's at their peak physical capability and their mind is sharp and they have tremendous physical stamina and so forth, they have high levels of NAD, very high levels. But if by the time you get to, say, 40 or 45, your levels are really going down. By the time you're 50, they're half of what they were when you half. Now, imagine, you go to 70, 80, 90, you're below half. Well, you can have the best car in the world. You can have a beautiful Porsche. If you don't have gas in it, it's not going to drive very far. So by the time you're 70 or 80, if you don't have NAD levels that are sufficient to support maximum function, you're going to think less clearly. You're going to move slowly. You're not going to have endurance. It's going to affect your body processes that use NAD. That can be your blood pressure, sexual function, the quality of your skin. All of the problems we normally associate with aging will start to happen inexorably. We can't stop that if NAD levels are down. It used to be that we thought of disease as we get older. I mean, people get diseases as they get older, and they assumed it's just, I don't know, in the cards, or it just happens. There was no explanation for it. And we based a whole medical system around treating each of these diseases. But ultimately, these are all part of an aging process. And if we could slow that down or even arrest its progression, we wouldn't have these diseases. So we need to go back and think fundamentally, rethink this. And what can we do to maintain NAD as long as possible at a healthy level so we forestall these effects of aging?
And so when it comes to NAD levels like dropping over time, you talked about ketosis and eating a ketogenic diet to help. You talked about exercise, and also just having the awareness around all of this. Like, is there anything else that people can do from like a natural perspective before we talk about supplementation to kind of hedge against the decrease in NAD levels?
Well, the major cause of NAD going down is actually its depletion. And the mechanism of its destruction is now understood. We understand what rips apart the NAD in our bodies and removes it. And it's an enzyme called CD38. And this enzyme is present on the outside and inside of most of our cells. And as we get older, the levels go up and up and up, inexorably up and up. By the time you're in your 50s or 60s, you have very high levels of CD38. And this CD38 efficiently removes NAD. So that's the cause of it falling down. Now, how can we block CD38's increase? It's stimulated by inflammation. So as you're living and thinking about what you can do to maintain your NAD, the first thing to think of is how can I avoid excessive inflammation? If you avoid inflammation, you will avoid the bump in CD38 over time, and you will see a preservation or near preservation of NAD levels. We know, for example, if you take the ovary, we know that women will enter menopause around 50, something like 52, something of that range. The CD830 levels in the ovary in a 20-year-old are very, very low. By the time you're in your mid-40s or early 50s, you have very high CD38 levels, especially in the region of the ovary that allows the oocyte to hatch, to move into the uterus, to have ovulation. Sky-high CD38 levels. Concomitantly, the NAD levels are very, very low. And then you enter menopause because your NAD levels have plummeted below the point that they can sustain ovulation. So what we have to understand is we've got to block the bump in CD38 or stop it from working and supplement NAD so that the combination is that we preserve our levels.
And there's been a huge trend now to get like NAD drips. You see it a lot at these wellness clinics, and people spend a lot of money on it. What's your take on that?
I'm very negative about that. You're talking about intravenous infusions of NAD, and there's sort of a fad about that. But I want to say that the science does not strongly support this approach. And the reason is that NAD is a very electrically charged molecule, very polar, it's very negatively charged. And because of that, it doesn't get into cells. So if you put NAD into your blood or if you swallow NAD, it's not going to get into your cells. It can't. It's just too negatively charged and the cells don't permit it to cross their membrane and enter the cell. So how can you get anything into the cell? You have to use the precursors of NAD. Those are the molecules that antecede the production of NAD. And there's specifically two of them. There's NR, which is then converted to NMN, and then that's converted into NAD. Now, NMN, and to a certain extent, NR can cross the cell membrane and they can get into cells, whereupon after they've gotten in there, they're converted to NAD. So that's the best way to do it. If you give an infusion, an IV infusion, an intravenous infusion of NAD, you will get it into the blood for sure. Okay. It's going into your vein. So you can place NAD, but what's happening then? It can't get into the cells. It can't help you. What happens is that there are enzymes on the outside of the cells and they break down the NAD to form NMN. And it's the NMN that ultimately will get into your cell. Well, you can also take a capsule. You can swallow a capsule with NMN or NR. You can swallow that and that'll be absorbed nicely and you'll get the same blood level. So there's no intrinsic benefit at all to going to an IV clinic to get IV NAD. I don't recommend it.
And it's expensive, right?
Yeah. And painful and unnecessary. It's not at home. You have to leave your house, go into a clinic to get an intravenous infusion of something that's worse than just taking a capsule at home. It's not for me.
Diving into this a little bit more, I think when something pops off on the internet like NAD, which has been super trendy over the last few years, you get a lot of companies coming out, making products, you get people talking about it. Everyone's now all of a sudden an expert. And then it's hard for people to identify like what's real and what's not. What are some of the biggest myths that you've seen around NAD that have been kind of trending over the internet over the last few years that people should be aware of?
Well, it's not a cure-all. Obviously, aging and disease are very complex processes that involve many, many different molecules and different systems. There is no such thing as a magic cure for everything. Okay. So you have to temper your expectations to be somewhat, you could be optimistic and the data out there are very exciting, but it's not magic. So we're not going to have a magic wand we can wave and suddenly everybody is free of disease and we all live to 200. It's not like that. And there's been hype. There's been exaggeration of the intensity of the benefits. But that's okay. I mean, it gets people excited in the field. It gets people aware of it. I strongly feel that NMN and any of these NAD supplements are exciting and are helpful. And I take them and I really believe in them, but they're not a cure-all. So I think it's just a question of avoiding the hype and looking at the data and letting the data tell us what's real. There have been many, many studies in animals, in disease models, which show phenomenal benefits of NAD supplementation. What I mean by that is precursor supplementation, supplementing NAD levels. There have been genetic studies in genetically modified animals to really teach us about the benefits. For example, if you remove CD38 in the ovary of mice so that NAD is not broken down, they're still having litters, babies, at a human age that's comparable to 90. They avoid menopause. So there's some phenomenal benefits. And then there are clinical studies we've shown, and others have shown, if you take supplementation with NMN, for example, in people who are hypertensive, that you can reduce their blood pressure significantly, impressively. All of the things that are predicted in the animal models so far have been borne out pretty well in the limited number of clinical studies to date. So I think there's a balance. It's not a cure-all, but it's very impressive.
Yeah, I love how you just dissected that, because I do think that people assume like it'll be a cure-all, or like, I mean, fasting is another example, right? Of people who fasting becomes popular. Obviously, there's some amazing benefits, but it doesn't mean you can eat whatever you want. It doesn't mean you just should never exercise. I mean, you still have to do like the basics. You have to master the quote unquote big rocks. And then these other things can really enhance and take your health to the next level if you take care of like the main things, right? And I also love how you brought up like the differences in research, because I do think that people will kind of extract research from like mice and be like, yeah, I mean, does it seem promising? Yes, but it doesn't necessarily mean as much unless it's correlates with like humans, right? And I think that's like a big takeaway, right?
Yeah, cancer's been cured over 100 times already in mice, not so much in humans. So, but we learn a lot from these animal studies. We learn a lot about mechanism. We learn a lot about pathophysiology. We really start to deeply understand aging by going into simple systems, even simpler than mice. Most of the aging research has been done on worms. Okay, so but we learn a lot from that. And we take that and ultimately it translates to the human, yes or no. And that has to be defined in a proper clinical study. It's well carried out, and adheres to all of the protocols. But we're getting there. And the clinical studies to date, although they're few in number with NMN and NR, they're impressive. As I mentioned, I mean, for example, there's one study that shows that you can walk a lot longer in 6 minutes. That's a real difference. I mean, that makes a real difference. It's real people walking, which is something we do all day. And if we can walk a lot farther, if we're elderly and we're taking an NMN supplement, then that's a meaningful change in your life. There have been clear benefits in the blood pressure area I mentioned in that study that was done. So there are some translatable events. Every study that's been done has been helpful. Most of them have confirmed what we've seen in animals, and it's a stepwise process, but we're getting there.
Let's talk more about precursors, because as we're recording here, you got Thanksgiving coming up next week, excuse me. And when people eat a lot of turkey, people tend to fall asleep, right? And then they say it's because tryptophan is like the precursor to, was it melatonin and serotonin perhaps? And so I kind of understand it that way, but I also don't like, how do I know that these precursors are like guaranteed to like transfer over? Like, can you walk the audience through how precursors work?
Yeah. So when NAD is made in the body, we don't swallow NAD, by the way. We don't get it from eating turkey. So when you go to Thanksgiving and you can eat a lot of turkey, you're not going to eat any NAD in the turkey. And if you did, if there were NAD in your turkey, it would not cross from your intestine into your blood. It would not be absorbed. So NAD, because it's so electrically charged, cannot be eaten. I'll be very clear about that. So how can you solve this problem? How do you raise and turn up the spigot and get more of this in your body? Well, in the body, NAD is constructed in several steps. The first step is nicotinamide. That's something we all have in our healthy diet, so I'm not worried about that as a starting material. Then it's converted to nicotinamide riboside, or NR. Okay, and that can occur through a series of enzymes that generally are there and don't decrease with aging very much. So that's pretty stable. The NR is not charged. It's not electrically charged, so it can go through membranes of cells and get into the cell. Once it's in the cell, it's then converted with a phosphate on the end of it to be NMN, which is nicotinamide monophosphate. Now, that molecule is useful because it's easily converted with one more phosphate into NAD. So that's the process. It goes from nicotinamide to NR to NMN and then to NAD. So that's the natural process. That's how it's made in the body. If you swallow the precursors along this route, that is, if you swallow NR or NMN, they will be absorbed across the intestine. They will go into the blood. They'll circulate to every cell in your body, and they will cross through the membrane of the cell wall, and they will go inside the cell easily. And there, they're acted upon by enzymes to form NAD. So that's how you boost NAD. You give the precursors, the earlier steps, they get into the cell, and the cell does the rest of the work.
So you can't swallow NAD. I mean, that was an interesting point you brought up. Like you can't.
But it wouldn't go anywhere. Yeah, no, it would not get into your blood.
So from a supplementation standpoint, like what do you think is the most effective way? If somebody's listening to this or they're watching this and like, okay, I got the benefits of NAD, Dr. Salzman's convinced me. What is your preferred method of supplementation? Which precursors? How do you do it? Like what's the best way?
Well, going back to the bathroom analogy, to the bathtub analogy, I want to have something that's going to turn on the spigot and let the water in, but I also want to close down on the drain. Just pouring in more water, kind of stupid if the drain is big. It's not a very efficient way to raise the level of water in your bathtub. So when we thought about that conceptually, we said, what is the best supplement that could be given to a person that would turn up the spigot and decrease the drain size? And the answer to that is to add other things together with the supplement, that with the NMN, for example, that close down the drain, that shut down CD38, that stop the drain from being big, that stop the CD38 from being present and cleaving and destroying NAD. And so we added into the capsule, our capsule, several other materials which interfere with CD38, and those would be resveratrol and the hydroxytyrosol. So we have 4 substances, key substances in our product. We have the NMN there. You've got to have the precursor. Okay, so we have 900 milligrams. It's in the capsule. Very important. That's turning the spigot on. It's providing for the NAD to be made. But then we have other components within the capsule that have as their duty to decrease the activity of CD38 so that the NAD that's being made is not being chopped up. So I think it's the combination of these materials that is the best way to go. The majority of companies, in fact, all the other companies I'm aware of, they sell NMN, for example, or NR, and that's great. You get a boost, and the NAD will go up with those. That's been proven in humans, proven in clinical studies. But you can do better. And you can do better by joining that component, say the NMN, joining it with other materials which block CD38.
Yeah, because that's the main thing, right? That drives down NAD levels is the CD38, correct?
Terrible, yeah. And it goes up as you get older and older. By the time, when you get older, your gut gets leaky. It's just inevitable. The tight fitting of all the cells in your gut, it's not there when you're in your 60s and 70s. Things leak out. They leak into your blood, bacteria, bacterial toxins, and they cause inflammation. So we can think maybe we ought to stop talking about aging as a process and call it an inflammatory disease, because that's really what it is. You're getting chronic inflammation at low level. You're not in the hospital. You're getting chronic inflammation, which drives up CD38 everywhere. And that inevitably takes its toll and drops down the NAD. So that's our approach with the supplementation. Stop CD38, boost up NAD by giving a supplement, like a precursor.
And NMN's being used now for hair loss, right? Like, so why is it effective for hair growth?
Well, in the scalp or any place where there's hair, there's a very active metabolic process to produce new hair. It's in the hair follicle. It's a very interesting organ, actually. Or when you think about it, there's a lot of oxidant stress. There's a lot that can go wrong. It's destroyed over time, and it loses a lot of features. Its ability to inject melanin to make beautiful hair color. By the time you're 50 or 60, or you get gray hair. The hair follicle is failing. The number of hair follicles drops out. So people who are in their 70s and 80s have much thinner hair than, say, someone who's 15. So the hair follicle's under tremendous stress as you age, and the CD38 levels are rising in the hair follicle. The NAD levels are falling. So, of course, that would be a very important place to look, NAD, boosting NAD in terms of hair color and hair growth.
And what about like how people take it from like we talked about the injection, not the intravenous stuff not working. You talked about like how you want to like pair it with these other molecules that you mentioned. Like what's the ideal like dosage and what's the ideal like form that you think people should look out for if they're trying to take it?
The dose has been looked at pretty carefully. There are a number of clinical studies, or many, many animal studies, but there are also clinical studies that have looked very carefully at that question. Some of the clinical studies have used 250 milligrams a day. It's a little, actually, it's not that much. I mean, the results have been so. Other people have used 2 grams. That was the Sinclair study. That's a lot. And other studies have used 1 gram. So we looked at all of these studies. And frankly, the benefits are apparent when you get to around 800 to 1,000 milligrams. More than that has not shown any demonstrable benefit. So why give more than you need? So when we looked at that, we especially looked at the Sinclair study where they gave 2 grams. Now, they didn't see any adverse events. Nobody got sick. There were no toxicities identified, no side effects. So clearly there's a good therapeutic ratio. It's pretty safe dietary supplement. Doesn't seem to cause any problems. But we said, why give more than you need? And it looks like around 900, 1,000 milligrams is just about right. And we chose 900 milligrams.
Yeah, so talk about Wonderfeel and why you think your company is so much better and different from some of these other companies that might be selling NMN or NAD.
Well, we're not a distribution company, really. We're a scientific research enterprise that has developed a product that we think can help people. So it's based on science. It's a science-driven enterprise. We continue to do a lot of research. We pour much of our revenues back into research to better understand aging and the role of NMN and NAD and all the various processes I've mentioned. It's a research-driven enterprise. And that's what led us to construct our current capsule, which is called Younger. And it has these elements that block CD38 and increase NAD through NMN supplementation. It was all based on our research findings, and we continue to do more research. We're developing CD38 inhibitors, for example, that are more potent. We're looking at better combinations to augment the level in the bathtub, if you will, to get higher up. We're looking at other mechanisms that can provide better ratios delivered to the cells of these components. There's a lot of research going on, and that differentiates us, I think, from most of the other enterprises, which are more distribution companies. They package something and sell it, but they're not participants in the fundamental research agenda that drives progress.
Yeah, because you've been studying this for 40 years. You've, done a lot of peer-reviewed research papers. This has like been your bread and butter. I'm curious, so what was the motivation for getting involved in a company like this and starting a company like this instead of just going on and just, remaining an academic?
Well, I started in academia in 1986 or something like that, and started working on NAD. And I stayed ultimately became a professor and director of intensive care medicine for children in Cincinnati. And all this period, I published about 175 papers on NAD and this type of process. And then I got involved in pharmaceuticals because I thought I could do a lot more helping kids, especially through developing drugs. And I developed the first PARP inhibitor, for example, for humans, and licensed that to Genentech. That's an NAD using enzyme. And then I went through a number of other pharmaceutical programs, had a number of other exits. But at this point in my career, I was looking for something that could get to people faster. What I learned from the pharmaceutical process is that it takes a long time. It takes 10 to 15 years, even after a good discovery has been made. It takes a long time to get into the hands of people where they can benefit from it. And I saw the dietary supplement route as a much faster avenue to get help to people who need it without all these interminable delays. I'm not criticizing the FDA, but it is a very long process. And I prefer now to move quickly and efficiently and to make these advances available to people. That's why I joined Wonderfield, because it was the first cutting edge, scientifically driven dietary supplement company that I had come across in my field of interest of NAD. So it was a real natural fit for me. And they're great people, and they're really deeply committed to the science and research. Very atypical for most dietary supplement companies.
Yeah, I'm really drawn to companies that back their products up with science and research, because the barrier to entry to get into the supplement space is very low. And, I think there's a lot of BS out there that exists. And, I really respect companies that put the research behind it, because they can help to prove that, that the supplements, actually do what they say, and it's not just some bombastic claim, because people just end up pissing away so much money on supplements.
Well, I would go further than that. It's not just that we're testing the science, we're actually designing new molecules through science. So we're not just confirming scientifically that our products are useful, we're actually designing de novo new products that will be new dietary supplements. So it's really a science-driven enterprise to help people. And I mean, what more exciting thing can you have in your life than to work for a company like that? It's a terrific opportunity, and I'm grateful.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems like such a great company with a very strong mission, which, I think is really important, um, as well. I'm curious to hear your thoughts, on like the supplement space, like in general. Like, are there other supplements that you think are important for people to take, and are there ones that are overhyped that you think people spend way too much money on?
It's really a problematic industry because, unfortunately, without any kind of regulatory oversight or surveillance or peer-reviewed requirements, it does bring in groups that are hucksters, and they sell products that don't have scientific backing. Hopefully, nobody gets hurt, but I wouldn't even go that far. I am concerned. I have seen many people who, in all honesty, okay, they want to get better, they want to be well, they want to live long. They're taking them for all the right reasons, but they don't have the scientific background or medical background, clinical background to scrutinize these. So they're at the mercy of statements and claims and marketing and so forth that it really isn't grounded in high quality science. And it's sort of preying upon the public, if you will. So that's why when I joined Wonderfield, I was very careful in evaluating them. And I wanted to make sure I was not part of that. I wanted to be part of a company that's really, that I was proud of, that had scientific integrity. And I urge people to be very careful, especially polypharmacy. You see so many people taking 5, 10, 15 or more of these supplements, and it worries me. There are interactions that can occur that haven't been evaluated. The dosing hasn't been checked. Even the quality of the products in many cases is unknown. They don't have good GMP manufacturing. Maybe the quality of the ingredients is not up to par. Maybe they've gone bad. The public needs to be careful here. And I think most people are aware of that, but they may not have the tools to know about that. Maybe organizations out there will crop up. I hope that will do a careful job evaluating these things and putting out reports to people and informing them so that they do get the kind of feedback they need.
Yeah, and you're seeing people now, like I see posts about fake supplements where they're buying it from some warehouse they think is a real supplement and it's fake. And you just never know like what can be put in these things. And you see this, obviously it's been a trend in the drug space, like the addiction space, where people are buying pharmaceutical drugs on the street and they're laced with fentanyl, right? And you just have to be really careful now because the fortunate thing is supplements can do wonders for people's health. And it's been great that people focus on that. The bad thing is now companies and people get greedy and they see the financial opportunity and they kind of forget about their moral compass in the meantime and just do whatever they can to make their next dollar.
It's a very perilous time because on the one hand, the dietary supplement industry has the opportunity to move very quickly and make a real difference to help people. And the reason for that is the lack of oppressive regulatory requirements. But the flip side of that is that if they don't operate in an ethical and scientifically grounded way, they can put out bad things. And then ultimately what will happen is it's not just a question of losing money or wasting money. People might get hurt. If people get hurt through unethical or careless dietary supplement industrial practices, eventually there will be an outcry, a public outcry, and that would lead to, I'm sure, political changes that would lead to overregulation or increased regulation, which could stifle the main benefit of this, which is the fact that you can move quickly. And that would be very sad. It would be a shame. And this has happened in the pharmaceutical industry. I mean, most of the major advances in pharmaceutics were made before 1940. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, the great drugs were made before 1940. Phenobarbital, digoxin, furosemide. And how did they find these things? Serendipitously. They did all kinds of things. They found them. They were just in the bark of the tree. That's where digoxin came from, digitalis. But today, because of all of the regulation that the FDA instituted, it's become more and more and more and more difficult to develop such a pharmaceutical. It costs hundreds of millions of dollars. I know there because I've been involved multiple times with that. And that's a bad situation. It means it's harder to get great improvements in science to help people. Well, I hope that the dietary supplement industry wakes up and sees the consequences of being sloppy, because it ultimately will kill the golden goose. It will lead to government intervention if they make mistakes and hurt people. They have to be very ethical, careful, scientifically based.
Yeah, and then you lose trust of the public, right? And I think, so I've been in recovery for over 17 years from opiates, and you saw this with the Sackler family and OxyContin, right? Where they came out and they lied, right, about the drug. And then what did that do? That obviously legally they got into a bunch of trouble, and rightfully so, but also from a public perspective, it's like, do I trust that these drugs I'm being quote unquote prescribed, are they actually good for me? Or is it just something I'm supposed to take because the doctor told me to? And it's a very slippery slope, because the pharmaceutical space, there's been a lot of amazing innovations, right? And a lot of great stuff. But there's also been some bad players that have caused distrust from the public.
Well, ultimately, it's an ethical obligation of anybody involved in taking care of people in one way or another, whether you're a doctor, the bedside, or a nurse, or a drug developer, or a manufacturer. There is a moral conscience required. And it's in every aspect of that. If you are manufacturing a product for people and there's a slip up on your production line and you turn a blind eye to that, you're just as sinful as someone who, carries out malpractice at the bedside. So every step along the way requires a moral conscience and an ethical obligation, especially when other people are not looking. That's the most important time when ethics are required. When everybody's looking, it's easy to be ethical. But when no one sees you, you know what they say about surgeons and surgical conscience. My dad was a surgeon. My grandfather was a surgeon. And surgical conscience is when you're operating and no one sees you, you're alone in the room with that patient. And if you contaminate your glove, for example, no one sees that except for you. So what do? You do the right thing. So ethics starts and finishes with doing the right thing when no one's looking. And that's why at Wonderfield, we have just a rigorous and devoted dedication to quality in our products, so that maybe nobody knows, but we know. And that's the most important thing. We want to do it right.
What's been the most shocking thing you've discovered about NAD in your research?
I think the complexity of it in the cancer field is absolutely astonishing and complicated. We developed a drug for breast cancer and ovarian cancer in patients with BRCA deficiency. And there we found out that NAD played a critical role in maintaining cancer cells. So it was the opposite of what you'd expect. And so we actually developed PARP inhibitors, and those proved useful. And now PARP inhibitors are a mainstay of cancer in the clinic. I guess the most amazing thing I've ever seen, though, probably in my career with NAD, was in the heart attack work that we did back in 1995. We had animal models of myocardial infarction, ligation of the coronary artery causing heart attack, where you get death of part of the muscle in the heart. And we measured NAD, and we were shocked. I mean, when you have a heart attack, your level of NAD goes to zero in about 60 seconds. And I mean zero, like unmeasurable, not there. And then the cell dies and you have the heart attack. And that's why people perish from heart attacks. I realized at that point how fragile life is. I mean, the difference, but if your NAD levels collapse on you, as they can in a stroke or a heart attack, you've got minutes. And it is absolutely an essential molecule as God has made. You absolutely need this molecule every minute, every second of the day. And that's why my research in NAD has been so fulfilling, because I'm dealing with a molecule that's at the forefront or at the centerpiece of biology. So it is an amazing molecule.
So bringing it all home, if we were to kind of dumb it down to the top 3 most amazing benefits that come from making sure your NAD levels are like on point. I mean, we've talked about longevity, we've talked about inflammation, we've talked about aging, we've talked about cancer. Like, what are the top 3 that you think are like tried and true?
I think the ones that are most impressive to me are the ones that our customers have come back consistently and have given us vignettes showing why they use the product, why the supplements are important to them. The first one would be cognition. Clearly, your brain is the major energy consumer in your body, more than your muscles. Your brain takes 25% of your cardiac output. Every thought you have, every idea, every calculation, every time you see something or process something, try to remember something, you're using a ton of energy, completely NAD dependent. And so we've seen the effect with supplements on people's cognition more in older people. So there's people in their 70s and 80s. And what a difference it makes. We had a lady who was a crossword puzzle maven, who was a lady from Sydney, Australia, and her husband bought this shit. They called it vascular dementia. I'm not sure what she had, but she was clearly slowing down. And her husband came back and said, my God, the woman, she wasn't, she's just sitting on the couch. She couldn't do anything really. And now she's back to 2 crossword puzzles a day. That's the woman I married. I mean, that meant a lot to me. That was impressive. So cognition is right up there, right at the top. I would say the effect on sexual dysfunction has been very profound, because NAD is converted to NADPH, which is the basis of the nitric oxide system. So all of the male sexual dysfunction, female sexual dysfunction is completely grounded in nitric oxide production. That's why people use Viagra in males to preserve that. We've seen a lot of reports from people extolling the benefits they've seen from the product in that sphere. And then the last one I would say would be energy. We're talking mainly about, I've reports really from people in their early 50s, especially tennis people out there on the courts, and they're slowing down. And there they write back and say, okay, it's made a real difference. I'm back. I'm in the gym again, or I'm playing sports, I'm playing tennis. I see a real benefit there. So I'm starting, just to capture those 3. You've got cognition, you've got sexual dysfunction, then you've got the muscles, energy, sports. Those are the 3 benefits that most people would see. Longevity, I hope we all live much longer, but those are much longer studies. We won't know for many, many, many years if people are living a lot longer, but the evidence is persuasive to me that we're getting there.
I love your transparency in what's to be expected and what's not. Cause a lot of times you have people that work for companies that will come on or will just say like the most outrageous things just because they're, in partnership with that company. So I really respect your transparency and your integrity.
Well, I'm in partnership with science and truth seeking. I work for a company, but my partnership is with truth and science.
And so I know that, Wonderfeel, if you go to their website, you can get $15 off, younger if you subscribe. And there's also going to be a link in the description that people can go to that'll take you directly to that. So Dr. Salzman, anything else you'd like to add that we haven't covered that you think's relevant?
I think on our website, it can be helpful to people, getwonderfeel.com, because there's both scientific information, information about the company, about the products. It's a resource for people to take a look at. So I encourage people to go to getwonderfeel.com and learn what they can there.
And if people get a chance, check out Dr. Salzman's bio. I mean, his bio and resume is very impressive. I was so impressed by your work and what you've done in the science community. And I was super excited to talk to you because I'm somebody that, I see NAD all the time, I see NMN all the time. As somebody who has, in the business with podcasting, you see supplements, and then also like as a consumer of supplements, you see it. And I was very interested to get your take and learn about the science of why it's so important. So thank you again for all of your wisdom and for coming on the show.
Thank you for the invitation to be here. It's a privilege.
You got it.